there were some teams that expressed some concern about it's so close to the start of the stage. Would we be showing too much? But I'm over here saying, so long as you don't obviously troll, if I'm seeing Amaro in the building dead first 15 seconds out of you motherfuckers every round, I'm going to be mad, and so is the audience.
Yeah.
But everyone seems like they're on board with it. Even one or two teams that are going to have to play with a sub, even if only for like a day or so, are still down for it, and they will be, according to what they've told me, they're down to take it seriously, even if it means they're not playing with their starting five.
Right, here I am with a very special guest, Mr. CaliberJacob, who recently announced Breaking Point, which is one of the most exciting things to happen to the offseason since Element 1, which, just ended, but, definitely top five. Probably because there's only five, but, five tournaments that have happened, but it's exciting nonetheless. Jacob, how are you doing? And, what was the impetus for starting Breaking Point? You went into it a little bit in the promotional video, but, what's a little bit more of the reasoning behind running this tournament?
Well, the big thing was obviously with the offseason being as long as it is, there hasn't been a period like this in Rainbow Six before. I
Yeah.
want to say typically the longest time that we ever go without there being some sort of competition is like maybe the SI qualifier period, like leading into the event sometimes, but we're about to get that because we don't have qualifiers going into it this year.
Yeah.
So there just hasn't been a really big period over the span of Siege's esports calendar where you've had so many months off. And I saw two primary responses coming from the player community. The first was summer vacation, because that's just not a big thing typically. Like even when it was the system of minors running over the summer sometimes in like pre 2020 era,
Yeah.
sometimes there would be a lot of teams that would be bouncing from, oh, we're doing allied, then we're doing the next part of pro league, oh, we're doing dreamhack, oh, we're doing the next part of pro league, oh, here's a major. um, so that was a good thing, but the opposite side of it was it feels like it's going to be really tedious to try and jump back into major competitions again when
Yeah.
there's been such a long off season.
I
So,
think I noticed personally like SIs right after the winter off season,
yep.
which is minorly concerning for me because I know teams don't talk about it a lot, but ring rust is very real. Like you look at some I don't think it was the Antwerp major, but it was like one of the most recent majors in Counter Strike. FaZe bombed out of one of them because they had ring rust. It was like right the first event right
Yeah.
out the gates of the major, and you saw a major favorite, like one of the tournament favorites, bomb out super quickly because of ring rust. So it is a very real concern.
Yeah, if you mention bad news equals around FaZe Clan, they start getting Vietnam flashbacks. It's actually kind of funny. But yeah, the idea came around seeing what the player community was saying around the long off-season break, and seeing as it was kind of generally negative because it's drier than the Sahara. Um, I had the idea, wouldn't it be funny if I did something? And then that kind of percolated in my brain for a couple of days, and I realized, you know what? Hold on, I actually think this is something that's feasible to do. Um, it's the kind of thing I would not have tried to do if I didn't have team contacts already with everybody to be
Yeah,
like, hey, here's a proposal, and if I also didn't know the majority of the primary people you need to know when it comes to running remote broadcasts in the first place.
yeah,
So because team contacts were a thing, because I knew guys who had worked on, the previous Blaster 6 product, the guys who worked Challenger League, I'm friends with most, if not all, of the talent from a tier 2 level down.
yeah,
So it felt like because it was like the right time where there wasn't anything running over that period of the off season, and then just making sure that I know the right people for the job who can help do all the rest of the things I know I can't do by myself. It kind of felt like a perfect storm, and it was one of those ideas that when you think of it, and your brain is like, you know what, hold on, you can actually do this. It's like at that point when you start running with it, and then you're like, well, I'm too far deep into this thing. I kind of have to do it now, or I'm never going to know what it was like to come out the other side and like just not follow through with that plan.
yeah. And I do want to talk about the talent here because I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces, like Love Me, TTL, and V, and all those people, and
Hmm.
it's a lot of T2, T3 talent. Is this kind of serving? Is part of the goal to also serve as like a proving ground for some of these up and coming casters and production people as well?
The big thing about leagues like Xenon is the quality of play is never going to compare to something like Element 1. Unless
Yeah.
sometimes it does, but on the reg, you're never going to find a consistent bar for how teams are meant to play, what the structure is like, and oftentimes you're going to be wallowing in what the hell are these guys doing type play by comparison to top level play.
Yeah.
So part of it was wanting to make sure that there was an established roster of people who definitely, like, you already know when you hear Harrison cast, you know it's usually going to be good. When you hear John cast, you have the same
Yeah,
expectation.
of course.
But to give people like V and Dan a bigger platform with better teams feels like the kind of chance everyone should get at some point, because you're never really going to have a proper understanding of how good you are as talent without being able to do games that A, mean more, and B, are of teams that are legitimately trying to give it the best shot they can and are
Yeah.
proven to be good and have, gone to lands or whatever. So yes, it definitely is. It's a developmental thing for them. I've talked to them about what they can do in terms of how, well, where I have seen their strengths and weaknesses before, so there can be some workshopping with them to see what they're really capable of doing in their own skill sets. But it's like, if they don't get the chance to do something bigger than tier 3, then I don't know if they're ever going to have the chance to learn how to grow personally themselves with their own skill set outside of tier 3.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it is always good, like, to have these opportunities, especially because as great as Element 1 is, like, I'm never gonna trash Element 1 because Ferme knocked it out of the park. But it's also like there's only one of those in off season, assuming it's like a regular thing. So, the talent list is a talent list, and if you don't get called up, like, what your off season's done for tier 2 opportunities, that it can be rough for those up and comers as well. I do want to talk about the fact that we're going to have a little bit of mixing here. We're going to have the tier 1 and the tier 2 teams both competing here, which is also a very exciting factor. I don't think we've seen this since SCS 7, I want to say, where it was like, Astralis and OXG were kind of treating it as a warm-up event pre-SI. And we're getting a little bit of the same vibe here, because we're getting like the Beast Coast and the Beast Coast and the, holy crap, I'm blanking, but the tier 1 teams, and we're getting like the top placing Element 1 teams, like the Karn Co's and the Aerial Arises. Or I'm assuming those are the teams because like they were top placing, but
I did say top placing E1 teams, so yeah.
So like, what are your expectations for like seeing the tier 1 and the tier 2 teams like kind of mix? Because I know depending on the time of year, depending on the era, like sometimes the tier 1 teams are leagues better. Sometimes the tier 2, like you'll have a reality TV or a Parabellum, and they're like right there on the edge. Like, what are your expectations like for the level of competition between the two tiers?
It's the same thing that I had, because the original, it's the same level of expectation I had back when I came up with the concept for the league originally, or the tournament originally. I invited all 7 active pro teams at the time. OXG's moving, M8 is on their summer break, and Sonics weren't available, so it's like, okay, now it comes down to who are the teams like below that.
Okay.
And originally my consideration was, what happens if we maybe tried out, like, do we want to try Mexican teams and see if there's the possibility of well, what is that level of competition like compared to NA tier 2? But then I'm like, I don't want to worry about somebody playing on like weird ping at a weird moment, or everyone trying to connect to central servers. I know the Mexican teams scrim North America, but
yeah.
Ultimately I reached out to every team, and I specifically said, this is the kind of environment where I want you to play genuinely as if it is actual prep for what you can do in stage 2. If it comes down to working with the rosters that you think are going to be as close as possible to your stage 2 rosters as you can, because the original intent for the league is kind of to be like a preseason. If it's a very small single elimination bracket, high stakes, no real room for failure type of thing.
Yeah.
And then with a rule set like Infinite OT, I know a lot of people are going to say that kind of seems memey or gimmicky, but there will still be, like, for something like this, you can throw more things at the wall to see what sticks, and you can also take more risks, because typically in a best of 1 in the NAL, you're not going to take nearly as many risks as you could maybe as if it was in a best of 3, because it's like, well, based on the map that we're playing, or how many rounds away from failure we could be from losing this thing or tanking a season, it's like people are going to weigh risk and reward overall pretty differently. But I said to every team, so long as you're treating it like you legitimately are here, you want to win, you want to give it your best shot. There were some teams that expressed some concern about it's so close to the start of the stage. Would we be showing too much? But I'm over here saying, so long as you don't obviously troll, if I'm seeing Amaru in the building dead first 15 seconds out of you motherfuckers every round, I'm going to be mad, and so is the audience.
Yeah.
But everyone seems like they're on board with it. Even one or two teams that are going to have to play with a sub, even if only for like a day or so, are still down for it, and they will be, according to what they've told me, they're down to take it seriously, even if it means they're not playing with their starting five.
Yeah, and I think that's like a super important thing to like make sure is happening, because even if they're just defaulting like 7 attack rounds in a row, like that's better
Sure.
than like
At least you're working on your
trolling.
defaults and you're doing it when it's live, right?
Yeah, and it's like game day reps or whatever. So you're getting something out of it. The audience, like, you get to say, hey, this is how a default works. Look at it 7 times in a row or whatever. So there's some benefit there. I do want to ask a little bit about the infinite OT and like elaborate on why do it for every single map. Normally you'd see it like for the map 5 of the Invitational, but here it's everywhere, and like why?
Part of it was the novelty of doing it, just not necessarily for the sake of doing it, but there was a part of me that went, why isn't this a thing for every series kind of already? So this is going to serve a couple purposes. First, to see how often we actually end up needing to use overtime in the first place.
Yeah.
Like we had infinite OT in every map of E1's grand final, and we didn't have to go to an infinite portion at all because every overtime result was 8-6.
Yeah.
So maybe there's the chance that we don't even need to have crazy amounts of overtime in a series like this. But then there was also, I remember back when the CEO of G2, who shall not be named for obvious reasons, tweeted talking about G2 in Berlin. I think they had an overtime in their series against Rogue, and he said something to the effect of, why isn't this, like, how the hell can you have an overtime and then have everything be decided by just the one round?
Yeah.
Like, that
Yeah.
that seems weird. He's coming at it from a Counter-Strike perspective, which I think is fair.
Yes.
Or a Valorant perspective, but I think there is merit to the idea of having a game not be decided by such a small percentage. And if you're able to determine the victor by even just one more round, so there is more of a decided actual winner that cannot be disputed by any means, and you can't just say, oh, the guy who won this 1v1 on 7-7 with 20 seconds left. It feels like, yes, a team should be rewarded for winning under those kinds of circumstances, but what happens if we give teams who are playing seriously an environment where it has to be a far more set in stone, you definitely were the better team sort of accomplishment? And that's what whether it's a good idea or not, I think is going to be determined by how often it comes around. And if we have, one day with 2 best-of-3s that ends up going 9 hours because for some goddamn reason they just can't close that Nighthaven game because neither one of them know what the hell they're doing. But
So it's just kind of like an experiment. Like this is the ideal kind of environment to test this kind of thing and test infinite
in the same way
OT.
that it's like, I think I kind of fundamentally have a problem with best of fives. I don't think you need a best of 5 to determine who the best team is. I think everyone's in universal agreement that best of 3s are really good for that already.
Yeah.
A best of 5 seems like you don't have to take that extra step. There are some people who will feel unfulfilled by not having that many maps to decide something super pivotal.
Yeah.
So you can look to examples of like a Pro League final in really any sport that is suddenly decided by, well, that was a 2-0. That's it? There's not a third one? The hell? So it can kind of mess with that dynamic a little bit. But I also think watching that Element 1 final, by the time we got to map 4, I'm just like, okay, this is going on for, I'm feeling the viewer fatigue even as much as I'm into this game. Or everyone I could see watching G2 and W7M in Montreal, and by the time map 4 rolls around, you can see some people starting to groan, some eyes starting to glaze over, and I think with a game like Siege that has some of those problems, just from a viewership retention angle, just because of the nature of the game and how long it takes between action moments and whatever, that it doesn't necessarily need to happen that way. So if we're going to have a best-of-3 tournament all the way through, then we can have something like an infinite overtime that has the potential to extend the length of a game, but isn't going to like it won't take nearly as much time to finish a map with a couple of additional rounds as it would be to add another map into the fray afterwards, depending on the result of that one. So I feel like it's a fair
Yeah,
trade-off.
it's a nice balance point, like, between
Yeah.
them. So this will be the last question because I'm sure you have places to be, and I don't want to keep you all night.
All good.
What does success for Breaking Point look like? What would you consider like a successful outcome of this tournament?
If we can get away with as few problems with admin rulings as we can. I think for me the primary goal is to just make sure that this gets executed as smoothly as it can, because the thought of what happens if we tried this a second time uh, has it's circulated in my head a little bit, but I also don't want to get super ahead of myself. I'd rather make
Yeah.
sure that this goes ahead and is a is what I was initially drawing it up to be. Success looks like every team tries their hardest because they're given an environment in which trying their hardest actually gets them some genuine return.
Yeah.
Um, it also looks like a place where everybody, from a production slash talent point of view, everyone behind the scenes also feels like they're getting something out of it, whether it means the guys behind the scenes who I'm forking over some money to make sure that they're actually able to produce a good product and it's worth their
Yeah.
time, or the talent who, like, especially in my case, I'm over here trying to get more hosting experience because that's what I'm transitioning into. So this is
Yeah.
another vessel for that. Same thing with the rest of the talent. If it feels like they're getting the chance to work on something fun, but also means that they can, there's a little bit more like development for them, or it's just like another notch on their belt for something else they worked and they can add to their reel.
Yeah.
And overall, so long as it's the kind of thing that adequately can prepare teams for what's about to come for Stage 2 and Atlanta, like we're about to have a home country major. If we don't get some really good results on home soil, um, and whether that means that ring rust ended up being a problem, then this is specifically designed to be a place where that ring rust can be shaken at least by a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would say that success for Breaking Point means later on down the road, teams actually do really good in the NAL, games are super competitive, and then they go international and then they do really well, and then I can, hoist myself by my own petard and be like, look, they did really good because they had practice. That's crazy. But I don't think it's going to be quite that bad.
Yeah.
Or it may
It
not be
won't be
nearly
that
as
extreme.
notable. Right. So I think there's a lot of things that we can get out of this, that we are looking to get out of this. But if it's the kind of thing that, like for me, bare minimum is so long as that is accomplished and we can kind of get out of the thing and everyone's like, hey, that was really cool. Do we want to do it again? And then at that point, we can then start really thinking about, do we want to do it again? But yeah, so long as it's a good environment and we survive without any fiascos, that's the goal.
That's the goal. All right. Sweet. And to close out here, is there anything you want to say? The floor is yours, Caliber Jacob.
No, not really. The response to everything has been pretty incredible. The ability to do Element One co-streams kind of meant there was a bit of a platform to get it in front of a couple more people's faces, so I appreciate Ferme for letting me do that. I hope it goes well. It's been in the works for about 2.5 months, so that would be
Wow.
a lot of time and money kind of put towards the wrong thing if it doesn't go well. But
Yeah.
I appreciate everybody who's decided to kind of jump on this train just to make sure that everything works out. They want to donate their time and in some cases, a lot of energy to make sure that this actually works, because there's a lot of stuff that happens to produce one of these things that doesn't really get shown to most people. So I hope everybody enjoys it, and you better make sure you tune in August 10th through 13th. I expect you to be there. Thank you.